Marriage is like a leaky roof. You don't notice the problem until it soaks the bed and ruins everything you thought was solid underneath. My name's Eddie Parker, and I should have seen the water damage coming from a mile away. But like most guys who've been swinging hammers for 20 years and fixing everyone else's problems, I was too busy patching other people's houses to notice my own foundation crumbling. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Willow Lake, Maine isn't the kind of place where secrets stay buried long. It's one of those fading vacation towns where the summer people come to pretend they're rustic for 3 months, then disappear back to Boston or New York, leaving us locals to deal with the reality of broken septic systems and frozen pipes. The year-round population hovers around 8,000, which means everybody knows everybody's business, and if they don't know it yet, they'll make something up that's probably closer to the truth anyway. I'm 39, though my back feels 50 on cold mornings. Used to be a carpenter, until the housing market took a dive and took my steady work with it. Now I'm what you'd politely call a handyman, though a guy who fixes whatever's broken for whoever's paying would be more accurate. It's honest work, even if it doesn't pay enough to keep my wife Jenna in the lifestyle she thinks she deserves. Jenna's 36 and works as a real estate agent, which in a town like Willow Lake means she spends most of her time showing overpriced lake cottages to city folks who think rustic charm means paying triple for a house with original 1950s plumbing. She's got that polished look that takes work to maintain. Blonde highlights every 6 weeks, nails always perfect, clothes that cost more than I make in a week. Not that I'm complaining. When we met 15 years ago, that polish was part of what drew me to her. Now it just feels like another wall between us. Our daughter Mia is 14 and sharp as a tack. She's got my dark hair and her mother's green eyes. But more importantly, she's got a built-in radar for bullshit that would make a detective jealous. Sometimes I catch her watching Jenna with this calculating look, like she's trying to solve a puzzle she doesn't want to understand. The first real crack in my marriage showed up on a Tuesday in November. I was in my workshop behind the house, rebuilding a carburetor for Mrs. Henderson's ancient snowblower, when I heard Jenna's voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone, and something in her tone made me stop what I was doing and listen. "No, Eddie won't be a problem," she was saying, her voice lower than usual. "He's always working anyway. He won't even notice." I set down my wrench and moved closer to the window. The kitchen light was on, and I could see her pacing back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. "Clint, you worry too much," she continued, and I felt my stomach drop. Clint Dalton. I knew that name. Clinton Slick Dalton was everything I wasn't. Smooth-talking, well-dressed, driving a BMW that cost more than most people's houses. He worked as a mortgage broker, which, in Willow Lake, made him something of a big shot. The kind of guy who wore expensive cologne and talked about his investment portfolio at the hardware store. The kind of guy who'd never had grease under his fingernails or calluses on his palms. "The Lakeside Inn has that new suite," Jenna was saying. "We could meet there Thursday night. I'll tell Eddie I'm showing properties to that couple from Portland." I stood there in the cold workshop, listening to my wife plan what was obviously not a business meeting, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was more like the moment when you're working on a house and realize the whole structure is compromised. That sinking feeling when you understand the damage goes deeper than what you can see on the surface. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went back to the carburetor and worked until my hands stopped shaking. When Jenna came out to tell me dinner was ready, I managed to grunt something that passed for normal conversation. "You're quiet tonight," she said as we sat around the kitchen table. Mia was texting someone, the way teenagers do, but I caught her glancing up at us with that worried look kids get when they sense tension. "Just tired," I said, pushing meatloaf around my plate. "Long day." "Well, I might be late Thursday," Jenna said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I've got clients coming in from Portland. Might take them to dinner, show them some of the higher-end properties." "Sure," I said, "whatever." Mia looked up from her phone. "Dad, you okay? You look weird." "Thanks, sweetheart." Every man loves to hear he looks weird. She grinned. "You know what I mean. You've got that face you get when someone asks you to fix something that can't be fixed." Smart kid. Too smart, sometimes. After dinner, I helped Mia with her algebra homework, while Jenna disappeared into the bedroom with her laptop, claiming she had to research properties for her Portland clients. The lie came so easily, I wondered how long she'd been practicing. "Dad?" Mia said as we worked through a particularly nasty equation. "Are you and Mom okay?" I looked at her. really looked. She had that serious expression she got when she was trying to figure out adult problems that shouldn't be her responsibility.
Why do you ask?
She shrugged. I don't know. You guys don't really talk anymore. And Mom's been different lately. Like, she's always on her phone, and she gets all weird when it rings. Different how? She bought new underwear, Mia said, then immediately turned red. I mean, I saw the Victoria's Secret bag in her closet. And she's been working out more. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but my wife of 15 years had never shown much interest in Victoria's Secret or working out. Not for me, anyway. People change, I said, though the words tasted bitter. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. Mia gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it, but she went back to her homework without pushing. Smart kid, like I said. Thursday came, and Jenna left the house at 6, dressed in a black dress I'd never seen before, and enough perfume to choke a horse. She kissed my cheek, a quick, guilty peck that felt more like an apology than affection. Don't wait up, she said. These Portland people like to take their time. Have fun, I said, and meant it in the most sarcastic way possible. After she left, I sat in my workshop and tried to focus on fixing a broken lawnmower, but my mind kept wandering. Part of me wanted to drive to the Lakeside Inn and catch them in the act. But what would that accomplish? I'd end up looking like the jealous husband, and Jenna would probably find a way to make it my fault for not trusting her. Instead, I did something that would have made my old-fashioned father roll over in his grave. I got sneaky. Jenna had an old iPhone she'd replaced last year, but never thrown away. She kept it in the junk drawer in the kitchen, claiming she meant to recycle it properly someday. What she'd forgotten was that it still connected to our Wi-Fi, and more importantly, it was still logged into her iCloud account. It took me about 20 minutes to figure out how to see her text messages on the old phone. Technology isn't my strong suit, but I'm good at figuring out how things work when I'm motivated enough. The messages between Jenna and Clint went back 3 months. 3 months of planning meetings, sharing inside jokes, and escalating intimacy that made my stomach turn. But it was the most recent exchange that really got to me. Clint, can't wait to see you tonight. That husband of yours has no idea what he's missing. Jenna, Eddie's too busy with his little projects to pay attention to anything else. Sometimes I think he cares more about broken appliances than his own wife. Clint, his loss is my gain. You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer. Jenna, you always know exactly what to say. See you at 8. I sat there staring at the screen until the words blurred together. She wasn't wrong. I had been distracted, working long hours, taking her for granted. But instead of talking to me about it, she'd decided to find appreciation elsewhere. The front door slammed, and I quickly shoved the phone back in the drawer. Dad? Mia called. I'm home! She'd been at her friend Kayla's house, working on a science project. I tried to arrange my face into something that wouldn't worry her. How'd the project go? I asked, as she dumped her backpack on the kitchen counter. Good. We're building a volcano that actually erupts. Very original, I know. She looked around. Where's Mom? Work dinner. She'll be late. Mia nodded, but I caught her glancing at the clock. It was only 7:30. Want to watch a movie? I asked. Your choice. We ended up on the couch watching some romantic comedy that Mia picked specifically because she knew it would annoy me. Normally, I would have complained about the predictable plot and terrible dialogue, but tonight I was grateful for the distraction. Even bad movies were better than sitting alone with my thoughts. Jenna came home at 11:30, reeking of wine and making too much noise as she tried to be quiet. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed beside me, but I could smell Clint's cologne on her hair. The next morning, she was back to normal, or what passed for normal these days. She made coffee, kissed my forehead, and asked about my plans for the day like she hadn't spent the previous evening screwing another man. I've got to fix the Henderson's furnace, I said. Then I'm meeting Frank at Murphy's for lunch. Frank Morrison was my best friend, and the closest thing I had to a brother. He'd retired from the sheriff's department 2 years ago, and spent most of his time now fishing and dispensing unsolicited advice about everything from politics to proper barbecue technique. He was also the kind of guy who believed in old-school justice and had very strong opinions about loyalty. Tell Frank I said hello, Jenna said, not looking up from her phone. Will do. But I had no intention of telling Frank about any of this. Not yet, anyway. Frank's solution to cheating wives probably involved baseball bats and shallow graves, and while that had a certain appeal, I wasn't ready to go that route. Not yet, anyway. Murphy's Tavern is the kind of place where the beer is cold, the food is fried, and nobody asks too many questions about why you're drinking alone at 2 in the afternoon. It's been a Willow Lake institution since before I was born, and the decor hasn't changed much since then. Dark wood paneling, neon beer signs, and a jukebox that only plays songs from before 1985. Frank was already there when I arrived, holding court at his usual spot at the end of the bar. He's a big man, 6'3", and built like the linebacker he was in high school, with graying hair and laugh lines that come from 40 years of dealing with small-town drama. He was telling some story to Mickey, the bartender, involving a tourist, a jet ski, and what sounded like a very angry moose. "Eddie," he called when he saw me. Perfect timing. Mickey here doesn't believe my story about the moose incident last summer. "That's because your stories get better every time you tell them," I said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Last week, the moose was just annoyed. Now it sounds like it was actively plotting revenge. Details, my friend. It's all about the details." Frank signaled Mickey for another round. "You look like hell, by the way. Everything okay?" That's the thing about having a friend who used to be a cop. They notice things. Frank had spent 25 years reading people's faces and body language, and retirement hadn't dulled those instincts. "Just tired," I said, which was technically true. I'd been lying awake most nights for the past week, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what to do with the information I'd gathered. Because I had been gathering information. The old iPhone trick had opened up a whole world of evidence I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Jenna and Clint had been meeting twice a week for 3 months. They had inside jokes about my work clothes and my simple interests. They discussed weekend getaways and future plans that didn't include me. The worst part wasn't the intimacy, though reading about that had felt like swallowing broken glass. The worst part was how little they thought of me. In their text exchanges, I wasn't a person with feelings who might be hurt by their betrayal. I was just an obstacle to be managed. A simple-minded husband too stupid to notice what was happening under his own roof. "Bullshit," Frank said, interrupting my thoughts. "I've seen Tired, and this isn't Tired. This is something eating at you from the inside. Spill it." I looked around the bar. Besides Mickey, there were only 2 other customers, old-timers playing cribbage in the corner booth. Still, Willow Lake was a small town, and walls had ears. "Not here," I said. Frank studied my face for a long moment, then drained his beer. "My place. Now." Frank lived in a small cabin about 10 minutes outside town, right on the lake. It was the kind of place that looked rustic from the outside, but had all the modern conveniences hidden where they wouldn't spoil the aesthetic. He'd built most of it himself after his divorce, claiming he needed somewhere quiet to think. We sat on his back porch overlooking the water, and I told him everything. The overheard phone call, the text messages, the lies about work dinners. Frank listened without interrupting, his face getting darker with each detail. "How long?" he asked when I finished. 3 months that I can prove, maybe longer." "And you're sure it's physical?" I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the text exchanges I'd screenshotted. Frank read them with the same expression he probably wore when reviewing crime scene photos. "Jesus, Eddie, this is pretty clear." "Yeah. What are you going to do?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. In the movies, the wronged husband either confronts the cheating wife immediately or starts planning some elaborate revenge. But real life is messier than the movies, and I had more to consider than just my wounded pride. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to pack a bag and disappear, start over somewhere else." "What about Mia?" "That's the problem. I can't just leave her, and I can't put her through a messy divorce. She's 14, Frank. This is exactly the kind of thing that screws kids up for life." Frank was quiet for a long time, staring out at the lake. A loon called from somewhere across the water, that haunting sound that always made me think of loneliness. "You could confront Jenna," he said finally. "Give her a chance to end it. And if she doesn't, then you document everything and take her to the cleaners in divorce court." "With what money? She makes 3 times what I do, and she's got connections all over town. I'd end up paying her alimony." "So what's the alternative?" I didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. I drove home that evening with Frank's words echoing in my head. The house looked normal from the outside. White clapboard with blue shutters, a small front porch where Jenna used to sit and read on summer evenings. We'd bought it 12 years ago, when Mia was 2, and we still believed we were building something permanent together. Jenna's car was in the driveway, but when I walked in, she was on the phone again. She saw me and quickly wrapped up the conversation. "Hi, honey," she said, giving me that bright, fake smile she'd perfected. "How was lunch with Frank?" "Fine." He says hello. "That's nice. Listen, I might be late again tomorrow night. The Johnsons want to see that property on Elm Street, and you know how picky they are. The Johnsons. I'd done some work for them last year. Nice people, but they'd already bought a house on the other side of town. Either Jenna was getting sloppy with her lies, or she just didn't respect me enough to put effort into them anymore." "Sure," I said. "Whatever you need to do." Mia appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, Dad. Can you help me with my history essay? It's about World War II, and I know you've read like every book ever written about it." "Of course, sweetheart." We sat at the kitchen table while Jenna disappeared upstairs, claiming she needed to research properties online. Mia's essay was about the resistance movements in occupied Europe, ordinary people who decided they'd had enough and fought back against overwhelming odds. "It's kind of inspiring," Mia said as we worked through her outline. "Like, these people weren't soldiers or anything. They were just regular folks who got pushed too far and decided to push back." "Sometimes that's what it takes," I said. "Sometimes regular people have to stand up for themselves." "Yeah, but it was dangerous, right? They had to be really smart about it or they'd get caught." Smart. That was the key word. The resistance fighters Mia was writing about hadn't won through brute force. They'd won through patience, planning, and knowing their enemies better than their enemies knew them. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to Jenna's patterns. She was meeting Clint twice a week, always on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She'd started going to a new gym across town, the kind of place that cost 3 times as much as the local YMCA, but had better lighting and newer equipment. She'd bought new clothes, new perfume, and started getting her nails done every week instead of every month. More importantly, I started paying attention to Clint. Willow Lake was small enough that avoiding someone took real effort, and I'd been unconsciously avoiding him for months. Now I made a point of being wherever he was likely to show up. He was a regular at the coffee shop on Main Street, usually there around 7:30 in the morning, reading the Wall Street Journal and checking his phone. He drove his BMW like he was auditioning for a car commercial, and he had a habit of parking across 2 spaces to protect his paint job. He ate lunch at the fancy bistro that had opened last year, the one that charged $15 for a sandwich and called it artisanal. He was also, I discovered, married. Kelly Dalton was a quiet woman who worked as a librarian and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. She was the kind of person who faded into the background at social events, overshadowed by her husband's loud personality and expensive clothes. I'd seen her around town for years, but had never really paid attention to her. Now I found myself wondering if she knew what her husband was doing twice a week at the Lakeside Inn. The answer came on a cold December afternoon when I was fixing a broken pipe at the library. Kelly was working late, and we were the only 2 people in the building. She made coffee and offered me a cup, and we ended up talking about small-town life and the challenges of maintaining old buildings. "Clint keeps saying we should move somewhere warmer," she said, staring out the window at the snow that had started falling. "Florida, maybe, or Arizona. Somewhere with better opportunities. What do you think about that?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I like it here. This is home, you know. But Clint, he's always looking for something better, something more exciting." The way she said it made me think she knew more than she was letting on. There was a sadness in her voice, a resignation that spoke of suspicions she didn't want to confirm. "Marriage is hard work," I said, immediately feeling like a hypocrite. "Yes, it is, especially when you feel like you're the only one working at it." We looked at each other across the small break room, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. The look of someone who'd been trying to hold together something that was already broken. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in limbo, pretending everything was normal while my wife planned a future that didn't include me. But I also couldn't just walk away and let them win. If Jenna wanted to play games, I'd play along, but I'd play by my own rules. The first rule was information. I needed to know everything. When they met, where they went, what they planned. The old iPhone was a good start, but I needed more. The second rule was patience. Whatever I did, it had to be smart and calculated. Emotional reactions would just make me look like the wronged husband, and that wasn't the role I wanted to play. The third rule was consequences. Jenna and Clint thought they were smarter than me, that they could carry on their affair right under my nose without any real consequences. It was time to prove them wrong. I started with something simple. Clint's BMW was his pride and joy, and he treated it like a shrine to his own success. Every morning, he spent 10 minutes cleaning the windows and checking for scratches before driving to work. It would be a shame if something happened to it. The thing about small towns is that everyone has a routine, and once you know someone's routine, they become predictable. Clint Dalton was nothing if not predictable. Every morning at exactly 7:15, he pulled out of his driveway in that pristine BMW and drove the same route to his office on Main Street. He stopped at Dunkin' Donuts for coffee, large, black, with 2 sugars. Then parked in the same spot behind his building, the one marked reserved for C. Dalton, like he was the CEO of General Motors, instead of a small-town mortgage broker. Every evening, he left the office at 5:30 sharp, except on Tuesdays and Thursdays, when he had late appointments that involved meeting my wife at various locations around town. Predictable people are easy to mess with. I started small, a handful of gravel in his hubcaps, just enough to make an annoying rattle when he drove. Sugar in the gas tank was a myth. It doesn't actually damage the engine, but a few drops of water in the tank would make the car run rough for a day or two. The beauty of these little sabotages was that they looked like random bad luck. Car trouble happens to everyone, right? And Clint was the type who'd blame the mechanic or the dealership before suspecting that someone was deliberately targeting him. But I wanted more than just car trouble. I wanted to hit him where it really hurt, his reputation. Frank found me in my workshop on a Saturday morning, tinkering with a chainsaw that didn't need fixing. I'd been doing a lot of unnecessary repairs lately, using the work to keep my hands busy while my mind planned. "You're up to something," he said, without preamble. "I can see it in your face." "I'm fixing a chainsaw." "That chainsaw runs fine. I saw you use it last week to cut up that fallen tree in your front yard." He pulled up a stool and sat down. "So what's the plan?" I set down my tools and looked at him. Frank had been a good cop because he understood people, their motivations, their weaknesses, their breaking points. He also understood the difference between justice and revenge, and he'd never been particularly concerned with staying on the legal side of that line. "I want them to hurt," I said. "Not physically, but I want them to understand what it feels like to lose something important." "Okay, how?" "Clint's business depends on his reputation. He's the guy who can get you a mortgage when the banks say no, who knows all the right people and can make deals happen. But what happens when people start questioning that reputation?" Frank grinned. "You want to ruin him professionally. I want to expose him for what he really is, a sleazy opportunist who cheats on his wife and lies to his clients." And Jenna? That was the harder question. Jenna's business was also built on relationships and trust, but she was better at managing her image than Clint was. She volunteered at the school, organized charity events, and had cultivated friendships with half the women in town. Taking her down would require more finesse. "One thing at a time," I said. Frank was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "What do you need?" "Information. Clint's been cutting corners on his mortgage applications, I'm sure of it. Guys like him always do. And I need to know more about their routine, where they go, who sees them. I can help with that. What else? I need to make sure Mia doesn't get hurt by any of this. Whatever happens, she can't become collateral damage." "Agreed. Anything else?" I hesitated, then decided to trust him completely. "I need to know if you're okay with bending some rules. Not breaking them, necessarily, but bending them." Frank's grin got wider. "Eddie, I spent 25 years watching scumbags get away with things because the system protected them. I'm way past worrying about bending rules." Over the next week, Frank proved why he'd been such a good cop. He had sources everywhere. Former colleagues, drinking buddies, people who owed him favors. Within a few days, he'd compiled a dossier on Clint that would have impressed the FBI. Clint had been cutting corners, just as I'd suspected. He'd been approving loans for people who couldn't really afford them, fudging income numbers, and taking kickbacks from certain contractors. Nothing that would land him in prison, but plenty that would destroy his reputation if it became public knowledge. More importantly, Frank had documented Jenna and Clint's affair with the thoroughness of a private investigator. Photos of them entering and leaving the Lakeside Inn. Credit card receipts from romantic dinners. Even a recording of Clint bragging to a friend about his hot piece of ass on the side. "This is enough to destroy both of them," Frank said, as he spread the evidence across my workbench. "The question is how you want to do it." I studied the photos, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I finally had proof of what I'd suspected. Sadness because seeing it laid out like this made the end of my marriage feel real and final. I want it to be public, I said. I want everyone in town to know exactly what they've been doing. That's a risky play. You sure you're ready for that kind of attention? I thought about Mia, about the gossip she'd have to endure at school. Then I thought about the text messages where Jenna had mocked me, where she'd dismissed 15 years of marriage like it meant nothing. I'm sure. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. The annual Willow Lake Winter Festival was coming up, a weekend-long celebration that brought together half the town for ice skating, hot chocolate, and the kind of forced community spirit that small towns excel at. Jenna was on the organizing committee, naturally, and Clint was one of the sponsors. They'd both be there, playing their public roles as upstanding citizens while carrying on their affair behind the scenes. It was perfect. I spent the week before the festival making preparations. I created anonymous email accounts and social media profiles. I researched the local newspaper's submission policies and figured out how to send anonymous tips to the editor. I even bought a cheap digital camera and learned how to use the timer function. The night before the festival, Jenna announced she'd be staying late to help with setup. "Don't wait up," she said, giving me that same guilty kiss on the cheek. "We'll probably be working until midnight." "I'm sure you will," I said. After she left, I sat Mia down for what I hoped would be the most important conversation of her young life. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something serious." She looked up from her homework with that worried expression I'd been seeing too much of lately. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd forgotten how perceptive she was, how much she'd already figured out. "Maybe," I said. "Would that scare you?" She was quiet for a long time, chewing on her pencil eraser, the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. "A little," she said finally. "But honestly, Dad, you guys have been miserable for months. I kind of figured it was coming. I'm sorry you had to see that. It's not your fault. Well, not entirely." She gave me a small smile. "You both kind of suck at hiding things." I laughed, despite everything. "Thanks for the honesty. So what happens now?" "I don't know yet. But I want you to know that whatever happens between your mom and me, it has nothing to do with you. You're the best thing that ever came out of our marriage, and both of us love you more than anything. I know that." She hesitated, then asked, "Is Mom seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, try to protect her from the ugly truth a little longer, but Mia was smart, and she deserved honesty. "Yes," I said. She nodded, like she'd been expecting that answer. "Clint Dalton?" I stared at her. "How did you—" "I saw them together at the coffee shop last week. They were sitting in the back corner, and Mom was touching his hand. It was pretty obvious." She shrugged. "Plus, his car's been parked at the Lakeside Inn the same nights Mom's been working late." "You've been watching?" "I've been worried. About you, mostly. You've looked like someone kicked your dog for the past month." I pulled her into a hug, marveling at how she'd inherited the best parts of both her parents. Jenna's intelligence and social awareness, my loyalty and stubbornness. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth," I said. "It might get ugly for a while. Are you okay with that?" She pulled back and looked at me with an expression that was far too mature for 14. "Dad, I love Mom, but what she's doing is wrong. If she's going to act like this, then she deserves whatever happens." The next morning, the winter festival kicked off with the usual small-town fanfare. The town square was decorated with lights and garland. Local businesses had set up booths selling everything from hot cider to handmade crafts, and a local band was playing Christmas carols on a makeshift stage. Jenna was in her element, flitting from booth to booth in a red coat that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. She was the picture of the devoted community volunteer, smiling for photos and chatting with everyone who crossed her path. Clint was there too, playing the role of successful businessman and generous sponsor. He'd positioned himself near the main entrance, shaking hands and handing out business cards like he was running for mayor. They were careful not to interact too much in public, but I caught the looks they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Secret smiles, meaningful glances, the kind of nonverbal communication that develops between people who are sharing more than just conversation. I waited until the afternoon, when the festival was at its busiest and half the town was crowded into the square. Then I put my plan into action. The first phase was simple. I started spreading the evidence I'd gathered. Anonymous emails to key gossips in town, containing photos and documentation of the affair. Social media posts on local community pages, carefully worded to avoid legal trouble, but clear enough to get people talking. Within an hour, the whispers had started. I watched from my booth. I was selling some of my woodworking projects to maintain my cover, as people huddled together, looking at their phones and glancing toward Jenna and Clint. The second phase was more direct. I'd prepared a large poster board with some of the more damning evidence, photos, text message screenshots, credit card receipts, and hung it on the community bulletin board near the main stage. It took about 15 minutes for someone to notice it. Then the crowd started gathering. I watched Jenna's face when someone finally told her about the poster. The color drained from her cheeks, and she looked around frantically until she spotted me across the square. Our eyes met, and I gave her a small wave. Clint's reaction was even better. He tried to push through the crowd to tear down the poster, but Frank, who'd positioned himself strategically, blocked his path with the immovable presence of a man who'd spent decades dealing with aggressive drunks. "Excuse me," Clint said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Sorry, friend," Frank said pleasantly. "Looks like there's quite a crowd here. Might want to wait until it clears out." By evening, the whole town was talking. The festival continued, but the energy had shifted. People were more interested in gossip than hot chocolate, more focused on scandal than Christmas carols. I packed up my booth and headed home, feeling lighter than I had in months. The first shot had been fired, and it had hit its target perfectly. But this was just the beginning. Jenna and Clint thought they could weather this storm, that they could spin the story or wait for people to forget. They had no idea what was coming next. The thing about small-town scandals is they have a half-life longer than uranium. By Monday morning, half of Willow Lake had seen the evidence I'd posted at the Winter Festival, and the other half had heard about it secondhand. The coffee shop was buzzing with whispered conversations. The grocery store checkout lines moved slower as people lingered to share gossip. And the local Facebook groups were lighting up with speculation and thinly veiled accusations. Jenna tried to go to work like nothing had happened, but I could see the strain in her face when she left the house that morning. She'd spent most of Sunday on the phone with her friends, trying to control the narrative, but the evidence was too clear and too public to dismiss. "People are saying terrible things," she told me over breakfast, her voice carefully modulated to sound like the wounded party. "Someone's been spreading lies about me, Eddie. Horrible, malicious lies." I buttered my toast and didn't look up. "What kind of lies?" "They're saying I'm having an affair. Can you believe that? After everything I've done for this community, someone would make up something so vicious." Mia walked into the kitchen, grabbed a banana from the counter, and gave her mother a look that could have frozen hellfire. "Mom," she said sweetly, "lying is wrong. Didn't you teach me that when I was little?" Jenna's face went pale. "Mia, I don't know what you think you know, but I know enough." Mia slung her backpack over her shoulder and headed for the door. "Dad, can you pick me up after school? I don't want to ride with Mom today." After they both left, I sat in the quiet kitchen and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The first phase of my plan was working better than I'd hoped, but I knew Jenna and Clint would try to fight back, and I needed to be ready for their counterattack. It came sooner than I expected. I was working on a bathroom renovation at the Henderson's house when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Clint's office. "Eddie Parker," I answered. "You son of a bitch." Clint's voice was tight with rage. "I know what you did." "I'm sorry, who is this?" "Don't play games with me. You think you're so smart, spreading your lies around town like some kind of vindictive child." "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Clint, but if you're calling to discuss a mortgage, I should probably mention that I'm not in the market right now." "You're going to regret this, Eddie. I've got friends in this town, connections you can't even imagine. When I'm done with you, you won't be able to get work cleaning toilets." "Funny thing about connections," I said. "They tend to disappear when people start questioning your character." "Have a great day, Clint." I hung up and went back to work, but I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my system. Clint was scared, and scared people make mistakes. The mistake came that afternoon. I was loading tools into my truck when Clint's BMW pulled up behind me, blocking my exit from the Hendersons' driveway. He got out of the car like he was auditioning for a gangster movie, all swagger and barely contained violence. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm listening." He looked around to make sure we were alone, then stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell everyone in town that you made up those photos, that you were just a jealous husband trying to cause trouble. You're going to apologize to Jenna publicly, and you're going to leave me the hell alone. And if I don't, Then I'll make your life very difficult. I know people, Eddie. People who can make problems for you with the building inspector, the tax assessor, the licensing board. You think your little handyman business is struggling now? Wait until you can't get permits, can't pass inspections, can't even work legally in this town. I nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting offer, Clint, but I've got a counterproposal. I'm listening. Screw you. His face turned red, and for a moment I thought he might actually swing at me. But Clint was the type who paid other people to do his violence for him. Instead, he jabbed a finger at my chest. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, I do. You're a small-time crook who's been skimming money from mortgage deals and cheating on his wife. You're not nearly as important as you think you are. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Here's what's really going to happen, Clint. Every dirty deal you've ever made, every corner you've ever cut, every law you've ever bent, it's all going to come out. I got in my truck and started the engine. Clint was still standing there, mouth open, when I backed out of the driveway. That evening, Frank called with an update. Your boy Clint's been making phone calls, he said. Trying to call in favors, get people to pressure you into backing down. Any luck? Not much. Turns out, when people think you're a cheating scumbag, they're less inclined to do you favors. But he did manage to get Bill Morrison to agree to hassle you about permits. Bill Morrison was the town's building inspector, a petty bureaucrat who enjoyed the small amount of power his position gave him. He was also Frank's cousin, which made things interesting. Can you handle Bill? I asked. Already done. I explained the situation to him, and he's decided that Clint's request was inappropriate. In fact, he's thinking about taking a closer look at some of Clint's recent projects, make sure they're all up to code. I owe you one. You owe me several. But who's counting? The next few days brought a steady stream of developments, each one worse for Jenna and Clint than the last. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a carefully worded article about allegations of impropriety that managed to convey the scandal without risking a libel lawsuit. The mortgage company that employed Clint launched an internal investigation into his business practices. Several of Jenna's real estate clients canceled their contracts, citing concerns about professionalism. More importantly, their social circle began to collapse. The friends who had enabled and encouraged their affair suddenly developed selective amnesia. Ruby and Tessa, Jenna's closest confidants, stopped taking her calls. The couples they'd socialized with found excuses to avoid them. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was what I'd wanted: public humiliation, social exile, professional consequences. But seeing Jenna's world crumble also meant acknowledging that my own world was ending too. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came on a Thursday evening. Jenna burst into my workshop like an avenging angel, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "How could you destroy everything we built together?" I looked up from the chair I was refinishing. Everything we built together? You mean like our marriage? Because I'm pretty sure you destroyed that all by yourself. It was a mistake, Eddie. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It didn't mean anything. 3 months isn't a mistake, Jenna. 3 months is a choice. A choice you made over and over again. She started crying then. The kind of desperate tears that come when someone realizes they've lost control of their own narrative. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just did." "No, it didn't just happen. You chose to meet him. You chose to lie to me. You chose to mock our marriage in text messages and plan a future that didn't include me. You don't understand. You were never here, Eddie. You were always working, always distracted. I felt invisible in my own marriage. So you decided to fix that by sleeping with someone else?" She flinched at the crude language. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like? Explain it to me, Jenna. Help me understand how 15 years of marriage became meaningless to you." She couldn't answer that, because there was no good answer. Instead, she tried a different approach. "We can fix this," she said. "We can go to counseling, work through our problems. I'll end things with Clint. We can start over." "Start over?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jenna, you didn't just cheat on me. You humiliated me. You made me a joke in my own town. You let another man mock me, mock our marriage, mock everything I thought we had together. I never meant. You meant every bit of it. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her cycling through different strategies: anger, tears, bargaining, threats. Finally, she settled on cold calculation. Fine, she said. If that's how you want to play this, we'll get divorced. But I want half of everything, Eddie. The house, your business, your tools, everything. And I want full custody of Mia. Good luck with that. I'm serious. I've got a lawyer, and he says I've got a strong case. Alienation of affection, emotional abuse, deliberate humiliation. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky to have visitation rights. I set down my sandpaper and looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who would use our daughter as a weapon in a war she'd started. Get out, I said quietly. Eddie, get out of my workshop, get out of my house. And if you try to use Mia against me, you'll discover that I've been holding back. Everything I've done so far? That was just the opening act. She left without another word, but I could see in her face that she'd gotten the message. The gloves were off now, and the real war was about to begin. I called Frank and told him what had happened. She's going to fight dirty, he said. You ready for that? I'm ready for whatever comes, but Frank, I need you to help me with something else. Something that's going to end this once and for all. What do you have in mind? I told him, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Frank sounded worried. Eddie, that's playing with fire. You sure you want to go that far? I'm sure. They want to destroy me? Fine. But I'm taking them down with me. The final battle was about to begin, and I intended to win it. The beauty of a well-planned revenge is that your enemies never see the killing blow coming. They're so focused on the obvious attacks, the public humiliation, the social exile, the professional consequences, that they miss the deeper game being played beneath the surface. Jenna and Clint had spent the past 2 weeks trying to rebuild their reputations and plot their counterattack against me. What they didn't realize was that I'd been using that time to dig deeper into their lives, gathering the kind of information that could destroy them completely. Frank had been busy too. His network of contacts had provided a treasure trove of intelligence about Clint's business dealings, and what we'd found was worse than I'd hoped. Clint wasn't just cutting corners on mortgage applications. He was running what amounted to a small-scale fraud operation, helping unqualified buyers get loans they couldn't afford, while taking kickbacks from contractors and appraisers. This is federal crime territory, Frank warned me as we reviewed the evidence in his cabin. If this comes out, Clint's not just losing his job. He's looking at prison time. Good, I said. What about Jenna? She's clean on the business side, but I found something else that might interest you. He handed me a manila folder. Remember how she's been talking about wanting full custody of Mia? I opened the folder and found photographs of Jenna and Clint at various locations around town. Restaurants, hotels, even the parking lot behind Mia's school during a parent-teacher conference day. But these weren't the romantic photos I'd used at the Winter Festival. These showed them arguing, with body language that suggested their affair wasn't as perfect as they'd been pretending. They're fighting, I said. More than fighting. Look at the dates. Frank pointed to the timestamps on the photos. These were all taken in the past week. Your little campaign is putting pressure on their relationship, and it's starting to crack. I studied the images more carefully. In one, Clint appeared to be yelling while Jenna cowered against her car. In another, she was crying while he walked away. These weren't the actions of a couple planning a future together. They were the actions of two people whose secret romance was collapsing under public scrutiny. There's more, Frank said. I had a conversation with Kelly Dalton yesterday. Clint's wife? She's finally ready to file for divorce, and she wants to take him for everything he's worth. How does that help us? She's willing to testify about his business practices, his affairs, his threats against you. She's got access to his financial records, his computer, his phone records, everything we need to bury him completely. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Kelly Dalton had seemed like such a quiet, powerless woman, but she'd been gathering intelligence of her own. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and Clint had scorned her for years. What's she want in return? Nothing. She just wants him gone. But Eddie, if we do this, if we really pull the trigger on all of this evidence, there's no going back. You're talking about destroying two people completely. I thought about Mia. about the custody threat Jenna had made, about 15 years of marriage that had meant nothing to my wife. Then I thought about the text messages where they'd mocked me, the lies they'd told, the way they'd made me feel like a fool in my own home. They destroyed themselves, I said. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. The plan I'd developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of releasing everything at once, I would orchestrate a series of revelations that would build on each other, each one worse than the last. By the time I was finished, Jenna and Clint would be so thoroughly discredited that no one in town would believe anything they said about me. Phase 1 began on a Monday morning. I sent an anonymous package to the State Banking Commission containing detailed documentation of Clint's fraudulent mortgage practices. I also sent copies to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the local district attorney's office. Phase 2 launched that afternoon. Kelly Dalton walked into the sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint against her husband, alleging financial abuse, adultery, and threats against witnesses, specifically me. She also filed for divorce and requested a restraining order. Phase 3 was more personal. I'd discovered that Jenna had been using our joint credit cards to pay for her dates with Clint. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts. I compiled all of these transactions into a detailed spreadsheet and sent it to her divorce lawyer with a note explaining that I expected full reimbursement as part of our settlement negotiations. But the real masterstroke was Phase 4. I'd been holding on to one piece of evidence that I knew would devastate Jenna more than anything else. A recording of a conversation between her and Clint, where they discussed their plans to manipulate the custody hearing. Clint had suggested that they could paint me as an unfit father, maybe even plant evidence of alcohol or drug abuse to strengthen their case. The recording was dynamite, but I needed to deploy it at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. That moment came on a Wednesday evening, when Jenna arrived at the house with her lawyer in tow. She'd clearly decided to escalate the conflict, bringing legal firepower to intimidate me into accepting her terms. "Eddie," she said, as they sat down at my kitchen table, "this is my attorney, David Chen. We're here to discuss the terms of our divorce." Chen was a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who specialized in taking working-class husbands to the cleaners in divorce court. He spread out a stack of papers and gave me a condescending smile. "Mr. Parker, my client is prepared to be generous in these proceedings. She's willing to allow you to keep your tools and your truck, and she'll only seek 70% of the marital assets instead of the full amount she's entitled to." "How generous," I said. "In exchange, you'll agree to limited visitation with your daughter. Supervised visits, of course, given the concerns about your recent behavior." "What concerns?" Chen consulted his notes. "Public harassment of my client and her associates, deliberate humiliation, possible stalking behavior. There's also the question of your mental state, given the obsessive nature of your actions." I looked at Jenna, who was avoiding my eyes. "You're really going to sit there and let him call me crazy?" "Eddie, you've been acting erratically," she said. "The things you did at the Winter Festival, the way you've been following us around town, it's not normal behavior." "Following you around?" "Jenna, this is a town of 8,000 people. It's impossible not to run into each other." "Nevertheless," Chen interrupted, "my client has concerns about your fitness as a parent. We're prepared to present evidence that you've been neglecting your responsibilities as a father while pursuing this vindictive campaign against my client." That's when I played my ace. "Before we go any further," I said, "I think you should hear something." I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of Jenna and Clint discussing their custody strategy. Their voices filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakable. Clint: "The key is to make him look unstable. Dangerous, even. If we can convince the judge that he's a threat to Mia." Jenna: "I don't know, Clint. She loves her father. What if she refuses to cooperate?" Clint: "Kids adapt. Once she sees that you're the stable parent and he's the crazy ex-husband, she'll come around." Jenna: "And if he fights back?" Clint: "Then we plant some evidence. A bottle of pills in his workshop, maybe some empty liquor bottles. Make it look like he's got substance abuse problems." The recording continued for another 2 minutes, detailing their plan to frame me and manipulate our daughter. When it finished, the kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Chen was the first to speak. "Where did you get that recording?" "Does it matter? The question is whether you want to continue with this custody fight, knowing that I have evidence of your client conspiring to commit perjury and plant false evidence." Jenna's face had gone white. "Eddie, that's not—" "We weren't serious about that. We were just talking. Just talking about destroying my relationship with my daughter and sending me to jail on false charges. Just locker room talk, right? Chen was frantically shuffling through his papers. This recording may not be admissible in court, depending on how it was obtained. Maybe not in court, I said, but it's perfectly admissible in the court of public opinion. How do you think it would play on the local news? Local real estate agent plots to frame ex-husband manipulate daughter. That's got a nice ring to it, don't you think? You're bluffing, Jenna said, but her voice shook. Am I? Check your phone, Jenna. I sent you a link about 5 minutes ago. She grabbed her phone and opened the message I'd sent. Her face went from white to green as she realized what she was looking at. A YouTube video titled, Local Cheaters Plot Revenge Against Husband, with a thumbnail image of her and Clint. You bastard, she whispered. The video's been live for 10 minutes, I said. It's already got 50 views, and the number's climbing fast. Amazing how quickly news travels in a small town. Chen was on his phone, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to get the video taken down. But I'd uploaded it to multiple platforms, using different accounts and proxy servers. Even if they managed to remove one copy, 10 more would pop up to replace it. What do you want? Jenna asked. I want you to drop the custody fight. I want you to agree to a 50-50 split of the marital assets. The real 50-50, not your lawyer's creative math. And I want you to stay the hell away from me and my daughter. And if we agree, then I'll consider not releasing the rest of what I have on you and Clint. Chen looked up from his phone. What rest? I smiled. Did you know that Clint's been running a mortgage fraud scheme for the past 3 years? Or that he's been skimming money from his clients' escrow accounts? The FBI is very interested in talking to him about that. Jenna stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You're not the man I married. No, I'm not. The man you married was naive enough to trust you. The man you married believed that 15 years of marriage meant something. The man you married would have let you walk all over him and thanked you for the privilege. I stood up and walked to the door. But that man's gone, Jenna. You killed him when you decided that our marriage was worth less than a few nights with Clint Dalton. They left without another word, Chen muttering into his phone while Jenna stumbled toward her car like she was in shock. I watched them drive away, feeling a sense of completion that I hadn't experienced in months. The final act played out over the next few days. Clint was arrested on federal fraud charges after the FBI raided his office and found exactly what Frank and I had told them they'd find. Kelly Dalton got her restraining order and filed for divorce, taking half of everything Clint owned before the federal government seized the other half. Jenna's real estate career imploded as clients canceled contracts and colleagues distanced themselves from the scandal. The video I'd posted had been viewed over 10,000 times and shared across every social media platform in town. She became a pariah overnight, the subject of whispered conversations and pointed fingers wherever she went. The custody hearing never happened. Jenna's lawyer withdrew from the case after the recording surfaced, and she couldn't find another attorney willing to represent her. She agreed to my terms without a fight, taking her share of our assets and disappearing to Portland, where she could start over without the weight of small-town scandal following her. Mia took it all better than I'd expected. She was hurt by her mother's betrayal, angry about the lies and manipulation, but she was also relieved that the pretense was finally over. I'm proud of you, Dad, she told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the lake. You could have just rolled over and let them win. Instead, you fought back. I'm not sure fighting back was the right thing to do, I said. Maybe I should have been the bigger person, taken the high road. The high road's overrated, she said, with a maturity that broke my heart. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions. Mom and Clint thought they were smarter than everyone else, that they could hurt people without getting hurt back. You proved them wrong. 3 months later, I was rebuilding my life one piece at a time. The handyman business was busier than ever. Apparently, being the guy who'd taken down the town's most notorious cheaters was good for my reputation. Frank and I had become closer friends than ever, bonded by our shared experience of dispensing small-town justice. And Jenna? I heard she'd